We are in a series called Didn't See It Coming, where we are looking at the 5 greatest challenges that everyone experiences and no one expects. The first week we talked about cynicism, how cynicism is formed, why it is so dangerous, what can we do about it. We learned that people are cynical not because they don't care, but because they do care, but they were burned by something, by someone. And the solution to cynicism is to become a curious person and to not let cynicism run your life. The next week we talked about disconnection. With roughly half of the American population feeling disconnected, feeling isolated, we learned that disconnection is really the tool of the enemy to take us out spiritually. The solution to this is community. It's to get plugged in, to be around other Christians. And last week we dealt with the sensitive subject of pride. And let's be honest, I think all of our pride kind of took a hit last week from the subject. The solution to pride is humility, because only humility will get you out of what pride has gotten you into. And today we are talking about a subject that is counterintuitive, and it kind of seems to run contrary to our society's values. Today we're talking about emptiness. Emptiness. And you might be thinking, well, how does emptiness counterintuitive? How does that run contrary to our society's values? Well, let me explain. In our country, we have widely adopted the slogan, the American dream, as our personal motto. This phrase that has captured the imaginations of not just Americans, but globally, countries all around the world. And as I was reading up on the history of this phrase, the American dream, and just so you know, I am no historian, but I was surprised to discover that that phrase, the American dream, actually developed fairly recently. Its roots go all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, but it was first coined publicly in 1931 by a man named James Adam, who is a historian, when he wrote the Epic of America. And in his book, he says this. He says, the American dream is that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunities for each according to ability or achievement. Early on in American history, this concept of an American dream, it was about creating a better life, rich of opportunity. And then it began to morph into this dream about acquiring more material things. And today it has developed into this individualistic adventure, not to accomplish this American dream, but my dream, my personal dream. And so this individualistic pursuit has become the American dream. And today it's very common when you ask somebody, how are you doing? For them to respond, living the dream, right? A paraphrase of this American dream. Not to mention that if you go to high school graduations, the speeches are like all the same, right? Ignore the negative voices to achieve your dreams. But let me ask you this question. What do you do when all of your dreams come true? What do you do when all of your dreams come true? You know, dreams and you accomplishing your dreams, they make great motivational speeches. They make great books and even do well in movies. I mean, it's always fascinating to talk about reaching your dreams, overcoming great obstacles, and living out who you want to become. But what happens the moment that you get there? The moment that you get everything that you dreamed about, that you get your dream job, you get your dream house, you live in your dream location. What happens when you marry your dream spouse? You get your dream family. When you achieve all of your dreams, all of the accomplishments you hoped you would accomplish, what happens when you get that? When you arrive there, when you experience that? In a very anticlimactic fashion, you think, that's it? That's it? That's not as fulfilling as I thought. That's not as lasting of an experience as I hoped for. And inside, you begin to feel a little empty. You begin to feel that those things did not fill you up like you thought they were. There's a famous singer and songwriter named Madonna. Maybe you've heard of her. She's been around for a while. She has sold over 300 million records worldwide. She has been named by the Guinness World Record as being the best-selling female recording artist of all time. She has been labeled by most to be the most successful solo artist in history. And in 2008, she made her way into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Madonna's pretty successful. And from every outward sign, Madonna is somebody who has achieved all of her dreams. Not just her dreams, but people around the world, they make becoming like Madonna their dream. And listen to her description of her success. It's fascinating. She says this: I have an iron will, and all of my will has always been to conquer some horrible feeling of inadequacy. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being, and then I get to another stage and think I'm mediocre and uninteresting. Again and again, my drive in life is from this horrible fear of being mediocre. And that's always pushing me because even though I've become somebody, I still have to prove I'm somebody. My struggle has never ended, and it probably never will. Isn't that interesting? Here's somebody who's arrived. And don't you kind of resonate a little bit with her words? She's achieved it all, and yet it wasn't enough. She needed more. She didn't want to be mediocre, and it's just this constant battle from one thing to the next. She arrived, and at the same time, she didn't arrive. She fulfilled her dreams, and yet at the same time, she felt empty. Let me ask you a question. Do you feel empty inside? Do you feel this tension in your life that life should be more than what you are currently living? It should be more than what you are experiencing. It's not as satisfying as you thought, or it's not what you thought it was supposed to be. And you are wondering, what's next? What's the new chapter? What's my new dream? Because this old, current dream is just not satisfying you like you thought it would. What do you do when all of your dreams come true? Well, when Madonna got her dreams, it wasn't enough, and I have a hunch that the same is true for you. So if getting your dreams doesn't fulfill you, what does? Well, interestingly enough, Madonna wasn't the first person to kind of stumble upon this concept of feeling empty inside. A few thousand years ago, there was a man named Solomon who wrote a small book in your Bible called Ecclesiastes. And it's very good. It's very insightful. I would encourage you to read it if you haven't. Just make sure you have a box of Kleenexes sitting next to you when you read it. Solomon was a man who had arrived. He had all of the power in his hands. Solomon was the king. He could have done anything he wanted. He had all the power. And he was so smart. He was so wise, so intelligent, that world leaders traveled from all across the globe to sit underneath of Solomon and learn from him. Not to mention that he was so rich, that what he had in reserve, that actually devalued silver for an entire generation. That's how wealthy Solomon was. Solomon was also a ladies' man. Now, to be technical, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And while outwardly Solomon had it all, it was not enough. He had everything that he could have ever dreamed of, and yet this is how he describes his feeling of arrival. He says this in verse 2 of Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Some translate vanities as futile or fleeting or meaningless. The image of this word is that of a mist or vapor. It's something that is elusive. It's vanishing. It's fleeting. It's this imagery of a mist, and you reach out to grab it, and you open your hand, and you realize you have nothing. It's gone. That what you thought you were taking hold of is not really there. It's not as satisfying. It's more like you chasing after a summer breeze. You can never actually get it. So what's meaningless? It's all of our pursuits. It's all of our desires to find purpose, to find fulfillment. It's the desire for us to achieve our dreams, to arrive financially. It's our desires to have all of our wants have popularity, that you reach out and you take hold of it, and then once you grab hold of it, you open your hand and you realize you are empty-handed, that it did not give you what you truly wanted. It's like a mist. You feel empty once you reach out and take hold of it. And it's interesting that one of the oldest questions ever asked in human history is about who am I? Why do I exist? What is my purpose on life? In an attempt to answer this question, we seek to fill this emptiness that we feel inside, this void that we have inside, a void that on the one hand, it drives us mad because nothing on earth satisfies it. Nothing fulfills it. And yet, on this other hand, we have this craving, this desire, this ache that we want nothing more to fill that void inside. And Solomon's answer to this question of why do we crave to know our purpose, to know our meaning, and yet why is it that every time we try to answer it, we wind up empty-handed? We wind up feeling empty. Here's why. Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11. He, God, has put eternity in man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. That longing, that desire for meaning, for purpose, is actually something that is supernaturally driven. It's supernaturally motivated. That in each and every one of our hearts is this desire to have a life that has meaning, that matters, and yet everything that we try to fulfill, everything that we try to accomplish that with, it does not actually satisfy us, because what is in our heart is not a desire for meaning. It's not a desire for purpose. It is a deep desire for God. That's what we have in each of our hearts. And we have in the back closets of our heart a giant God-sized hole that we desperately want filled. And three of the most common things that people try and they attempt to fill that up with, and yet they find out once they do that their life is just as empty and void, is pleasure, intelligence, what Solomon calls wisdom, and success. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 1, he says this. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. The first thing that Solomon does is he spends his life living it up, right? Enjoying life for all it's worth. And so many people, this is what they try to do. Their jobs are meant to fund their hobbies, to fund their dreams, to fund their pleasures. And so they seek to live a life that is the most enjoyable life possible so that they can live like kings and queens. And Solomon says, look, I've been there. I've done that. And what's his conclusion? He says this, but behold, this also was vanity. Verse 2. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? He says, even a life that lives it up to the fullest, even a life that squeezes life dry of all it has to offer, it does not fill the hole we have inside. Verse 3, he says, I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. When the sobering reality of pleasure did not give him what he looked for, he sought to drown out his feelings of emptiness with wine, with alcohol. And so often those who party it up, who drink it up, who light it up are doing so because they are trying to mask a deeper issue in their life. They want to forget their troubles, and so they take for a moment something that would help forget what has happened or forget this pain inside, to dull the ache that they have for the emptiness they feel. He says, my heart still guiding me with wisdom and how to lay hold of folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. Solomon says, look, I tried that. And I know from experience that it does not meet the deeper need you feel. I know that it does not satisfy. In fact, if anything, it robs you of what you currently have, so you feel emptier than ever. But pleasure is not the only thing. He also points out intelligence, learning, wisdom, as one of the pursuits that people try to fill this void inside. He said he tried to learn wisdom, learn madness and folly, and he concludes that wisdom offered the most to him. But look at his conclusion on wisdom. Verse 15. He says, then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. He says you can spend your entire life becoming the most intelligent person on planet Earth. Solomon knows from experience. You can have the most degrees humanly possible. And in the end, you will share a grave next to the fools and the criminals. Not to mention that all of your hard work, all of the endless, tireless nights of study, of deep thinking, it will long be forgotten along with the person who did nothing with their life. Verse 16. For of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance. Seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. And I would add that the more you learn, the more you discover how much you don't know. And so the pursuit of intelligence is not just futile, it's crushing. It has this crushing weight because it feels like you are always reaching out for something that cannot fully be grasped, because the more you know, the more you realize how far you are behind. You never reach a point of arrival. You always feel like you are 2 steps behind arrival. And it's not just pleasure and intelligence that people seek to fill that emptiness inside. They also try to fill it with success. They devote themselves to endless hard work, to build a company, to build a job, to build for retirement, whatever it might be. And look what he says in verse 20. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Solomon looks back at all of his accomplishments, all of the things that he's accomplished, all of his hard work, his tireless meetings, all of the sacrifices he had to make, and he is distraught over that. He is grieved. He is deeply distressed. Why? Verse 21. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by somebody who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. And is that not the sad and ironic truth of us all? We spend our entire lives building up for a single moment in life to enjoy. We spend our entire lives building up to a single season where we can finally relax, where we can retire, where we can, we've been building a company so that we can finally enjoy this last season of life. And then we get there and we are in too poor of health to actually enjoy it. Or suddenly we pass away and all of our hard work, all of our investments, they get absorbed into state programs and it goes to selfish relatives. Right? And all your hard work, it just vaporizes like a mist. Just like that. It goes to someone who had not and will not work. as hard to maintain what you spent your entire life building. Instead, they will take it for granted. It will be spent, spoiled, and forgotten. And when that hits people, when the emptiness of those pursuits hits people, there's two typical empty responses that we have. The first empty response is to self-medicate. Whether it's drinking a little bit more, whether it is taking the prescription pills that were in the bathroom sink, whether it's getting high or secretly looking at pornography, it is this desire to self-medicate, to dull the emptiness that we feel inside. And if you find yourself in a place where you have developed a life-controlling addiction, I just want to say, first and foremost, I'm really glad you're here. This is a place that you need to be. This is a great place for you to be. And I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you so much to reach out to your doctor, to speak with a counselor if you need to admit yourself into a rehab unit. I would encourage you, please do that. And if you don't even know where to begin, you don't know the resources that are around, my email is in the back of the bulletin that you have. Just email me, and I would be happy to sit down and talk with you about the options that are in this area to help you find help. The second empty response is self-care. Most of the time, we can look at the self-medication method and go, that's not for me. I'm not going to go that route. Instead, I'm going to do a better job of taking care of myself. I'm going to do a better job of eating right, of exercising, of living right, of drinking right. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. But in the end, both self-medication and self-care, it does not fill the emptiness, the void that we have inside. In fact, it just masks what we feel. Both are insufficient of filling that hole that we have inside. Why is that? And why is it that all of our attempts to answer, to fulfill that meaninglessness, that emptiness that we have inside, why is it that all of our hard work ends the same way, with us feeling empty? Why? All of the investment, all of the building, all of the careful, thought-through processes, it feels the same. Why? Here's why. We experience emptiness inside when we try to fill God-sized longings with me-sized solutions. We feel empty when we try to fill God-sized longings that we have with me-sized solutions. We have that longing, that craving, that desire for something more in life because we were created for a relationship with God. And any remedy that we try to find that is not God Himself, it will not fully satisfy us. It will not meet the deeper need that we have. I love how C.S. Lewis describes this. He says this: if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And I would echo the same thing, that if everything that you have tried does not satisfy what you feel inside, it's probably because you are focusing on me-sized solutions, that those will not fill the void. Paul says this in Acts 17. And He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward Him and find Him. Yet He is actually not far from each one of us. God put you on earth with a craving, with a desire for meaning, for purpose, to satisfy that emptiness, because it was meant to lead you to seek after God. It was meant to create in you this desire to search for God and to find Him. And everything else that is not God, it feels endless. You get exhausted, overwhelmed. You feel empty. And when we try to fill that God-shaped hole with relationships, with education, with pleasure, with jobs, careers, with caring for yourself, you end in the same exact place. It feels like you're trying to grab mist. It's empty. You grab hold of it, and yet you realize you grab hold of nothing. You feel empty inside. When we try to fill God-sized longings with me-sized solutions, we always feel the same. So what do? How do we fill God-sized longings? How do we do that? It's simple. You ready for it? Fill God-sized longings with God-sized solutions. And I know what some of you are thinking, like, oh, I would have never thought of that, right? But how do we actually do that? How do we actually fill God-sized longings with God-sized solutions? Well, as long as we are making life all about us, all about me, we will never find the solution that you desperately need. We have got to live for a bigger vision of life. We have got to have bigger visions of life, because the smaller visions, the smaller dreams of our life, they are just not cutting it. We have got to let go of our dreams. We've got to let go of our visions, of our mission, of our kingdom. Here's how Jesus said it in Luke 9. And he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Jesus is saying, look, if you want a real life, if you want a full life, then it requires following Jesus. And if you are going to follow him, it means that we put an end to our dreams, to our visions, to our kingdom, and we embrace a bigger vision. We embrace God's kingdom for our life. We have got to replace the desire to build your kingdom with the desire to build God's kingdom. We've got to replace that. We've got to flip that around. We've got to replace the desire for us, for life to be about us, about our kingdom, about our success, about our pleasure, and replace it for God's kingdom, for God's success, for God's fame, for what brings God the most glory. And how do we do that? How do we replace our kingdom for God's kingdom? We enter it. We've got to enter God's kingdom. We learn about what God's kingdom is about, and we live in it. We live out God's kingdom. The only way to actually replace any kingdom, the only way to replace any kingdom is through surrender. Where we surrender our rights. We give God the rights of our life, our privileges, our everything. We surrender ownership over our life. The motto that I've got to look out for myself, that I have the right to do what I want in life. We surrender that and we say, it's not about me anymore. It's not about my kingdom. It is about God's kingdom, and we surrender that over to Him. Have you surrendered your life to Christ? Have you given over your life to Him, to let Him lead and surrendered that? Have you made that decision yet? I mean, if you go to another country and you want to become a citizen of that country, you have to jump through all kinds of hoops to make sure that happens. And a lot of times that process is this long, drawn-out, rigorous process that at any moment it could be rejected, it could be declined, and you would be denied citizenship in that country. And Jesus died on a cross and He rose from the dead so that the process of becoming a child of God, of becoming a citizen of heaven, it wouldn't be that way. That faith in Jesus' death and resurrection would open the door to the kingdom, that anybody who would come to Him in faith, the door would be open and they would be let in. Second, we learn God's kingdom. We learn God's kingdom. God has given us His word so that we can learn what God is up to in our world, in our life, what God wants to do. And so what is the picture? What is the picture of what God is doing in His kingdom? It's a picture of God working through us, working through His church to make disciples. That's what it's about. It's about making more students of Jesus. It's about God working through us, through the relationships, the friendships that we have, for people to be drawn closer to Jesus. It is that we would lead as many people as possible into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. That is what it is all about. Now, Jesus said this in Matthew 28. He said, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, to the very end of the age." The mission is that we would actually go into the world and make disciples rather than waiting for them to come to us to be discipled. The mission is to go. And that is how we live it. We go. We go to our jobs with the vision of making sure that our job looks more like the kingdom of God than before we showed up. We go into our families with the goal of seeing our spouses, seeing our kids fall more deeply in love with Jesus. We go to our families, our extended relatives, with a desire to see them fall more deeply in love with Jesus. We go into our schools with this kingdom vision. We have the same vision with our friends, with the clubs, with our neighborhoods, with everything. With seeing the world come to Christ. The vision is not a stale vision of waiting. It's a vision of going. The vision is not of gathering but scattering. It's not a vision of just learning but living. And we replace our kingdom for God's kingdom when we choose to build God's kingdom, when we focus our lives on doing what Jesus called us to do and make disciples. This is how we fill God-sized desires, God-sized longing. We fill them with God-sized solutions. And we've got to ask ourselves, well, what is God's solution to the world? What is God's solution to our problems? What is God's solution? Friends, family, it's us. It's the church. We are God's solution. Obviously, through Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, that is the ultimate solution. But those who proclaim it, those who live it, those who model it, are those who have surrendered their life to Christ. God's solution is make disciples. And here's something that you and I both know. We don't seek things until we crave it. We don't seek to meet a need until we have an appetite for it. We eat when we're hungry, we sleep when we're tired, and we scratch when mosquitoes are unleashed. And I mean, holy smokes, have you noticed? Mosquitoes are off the charts this week. Unbelievable. But anyways, like we meet a need when we have it, when we feel it. And so people will crave a deeper meaning, a deeper hunger, a deeper thirst when they realize that the things that they have been trying to fill their life with is just not cutting it. When the satisfaction that they were hoping for, with the meaning that they were longing for, the things that they invested their life in, it just does not cut it. And we get the opportunity to point them to the one who actually does bring fulfillment, the one who actually does give meaning, who does fill the emptiness. But to do that, we have got to enlarge the vision of our life, to put away our man-sized solution and adopt God-sized solutions. And I want to close our time with this question. And if you do one thing this week, I want to encourage you to wrestle over this question, to agonize over this question, to labor over this question, to work on this question, to spend time praying over this question, to talking with those who are closest to you about this question, and then to be willing to follow God wherever He leads. But here's the question. If you knew you wouldn't fail, what things would you try to do for God? If you knew you wouldn't fail, What thing would you try to do for God? Is it something that you have been too intimidated to even try? Is it something that requires a sacrifice in your life? What thing, if you knew you had all of the resources in the world, if you knew you wouldn't fail, that you would try to do for God? We all have dreams of what we want to accomplish in life. We all have aspirations of who we want to become. We all have this dream inside, but the ironic reality is once we get there, once we arrive, we're not better off. We don't feel satisfied. We feel empty. We feel empty inside. The only way to fill that emptiness inside is not to fill it with me solutions, but God's solutions. And that is all about God's kingdom. And so to do that, we have got to dream bigger dreams. We have got to dream about God's kingdom and what God wants to do through you and through me and through us.